top 15 situational interview questions and answers. That's what I'm covering in this video. So that includes strong example answers to each interview question and how to use the STAR method to keep your answers structured and impactful. I want to keep this amazing wave of success going. An unbelievable amount of you guys got fantastic results from my last situational video, and there was so much that I couldn't include. So this video will put you in an even stronger position to pass your interview, plus brand new answers to popular situational interview questions. I'm Amri Celeste, your interview coach with over 12 years hiring experience. Let's jump in. If you're not subscribed, then please do and click like as well. First, what's the difference between situational and behavioral interview questions? So important to clarify this because they are regularly confused. So situational questions are asking you about a specific situation or time when or where something happened in order to assess a particular skill set that would be required in the role. Situational questions start with, give me an example of a time, describe a time when, how have you, describe a situation where, how did you, and there will be a ton of tell me about a time interview questions as well. The common theme here is asking you to describe a situation in the past where something happened, normally at work. Now, by comparison, behavioral interview questions will not always ask about a time when something happened, but they are still assessing your behaviors, normally in specific areas, again, that would be required in the role. So if the job description, for example, says that the role is fast-paced, then there may well be questions about how you handle pressure, but a behavioral question might be, how would you handle pressure, instead of tell me about a time when you handled pressure. So you would be answering theoretically, or perhaps summarizing how you've dealt with situations instead of a full description like with a situational question. You can still include an example if you choose to, but it's not always required with behavioral questions, and that is the difference. Typical behavioral interview questions might be, what makes a good team member? How do you motivate yourself at work? What is your greatest achievement? How do you evaluate success? I cover all of those behavioral interview questions and answers, plus more, in this video covering the top 15, which I will link in the description below this video. I highly recommend that you check that out before your interview so that you don't get caught out with behavioral questions, because they can be tricky. Now let's jump into these tough interview questions and answers. And as usual, I'll cover the best parts of each answer and how you can use each one in your own interview. The first situational interview question is, tell me about a time you made a mistake. An example answer is, as a careers counselor, I was working with a job seeker who had been struggling to find work for a while. They had been applying to many jobs but not receiving responses or interviews. Eager to help, I recommended that they start applying to a wider range of jobs outside of their preferred industry and salary range. I thought that this would increase their chances and boost their motivation. Unfortunately, my advice backfired and my client became overwhelmed and demotivated by the volume of irrelevant job opportunities that they were receiving. I realized that I hadn't considered the full impact this strategy could have on their overall search and goals. I worked with my client to come up with a more focused and strategic approach. We revisited their career goals and identified specific functions and industries that were a good fit for their skills. We also developed a more targeted resume and cover letter that highlighted their strengths for those specific roles. In the end, my client was able to secure several interviews and an offer in their desired industry and aligned with their career goals. I learned to be much more mindful of the impact of my advice and to focus more on specific search strategies earlier in the process that are tailored to their unique goals and needs. So why is this a good answer and how can I use it? So the example I used for this role was a career counselor, but you can use any example of a role where you miscalculated. So for example, maybe you didn't follow an established procedure, resulting in a mistake. Maybe there was an inaccurate data entry causing more work for another colleague. Maybe you didn't communicate adequately with a manager or supervisor. Maybe you misunderstood or misinterpreted instructions. Now, in terms of structuring your answer, you start by using a clear situation, like here. It explains working with a job seeker to find work and encouraging them to increase their range. Then describe the task created from the situation, like here. It's clear the advice backfired and caused overwhelm and confusion, which you needed to fix. Then show what actions you took. So in this case, a more focused and strategic approach, targeted resume, and then the result or outcome here, which is that as a result of having a more specialized search strategy, the mistake was fixed and resolved, and in this case, the client got an offer. Now, you might have spotted it already, but what I just described was the STAR method, which I used here, highlighted on the left. So what is the STAR method? STAR stands for situation, task, action, result. And you may have heard it referenced before as the STAR method, the STAR interview method, or the STAR technique. The STAR method is a way to answer interview questions comprehensively. So your answer is fully rounded, structured, covers everything you did and the outcome, which is what the interviewer wants to know. Without using a structure like this, candidates sometimes forget where they were going with their answer and go on a tangent, or they simply don't include key points in their answer. So while it's not necessary for every question, I highly recommend the STAR method for most situational interview questions. And extra points if you notice the learning section at the end of that answer here, where it covers what you learned or what you might do differently next time. So that can be important in your interview. It isn't always required if you're using the STAR method, but in some answers, it can be more powerful to include what you learned as a result of the situation, particularly if the question is about mistakes or errors or conflict. Question 2 is describe a time when you helped a friend. An example answer is, a few months ago, one of my friends was struggling with a presentation for work. He'd been working on it for weeks and he was starting to get really stressed out as he'd hit a wall and couldn't come up with any ideas. I wanted to help as I could tell that this was causing a significant amount of stress, but he's quite proud and didn't openly ask for help. I offered to spend an evening together brainstorming ideas. He was really grateful and accepted. I bought some presentation templates and some suggestions along with snacks and drinks in order to relieve some of the stress of the situation. By the end of the evening, he felt a lot better and more confident about the project. He finished it within a week, which was ahead of schedule. Now, a lot of people struggle with the question, describe a time when you helped a friend. So if this is helpful to you, then do click like and leave a comment. This helps the video show up for more people on YouTube. If you are one of the many that have already had great results, then you can also buy me a coffee. If you would like to, then there's a link in the description below showing you how to do that. So why is this a good answer and how can I use it? So this answer is strong because it's a clear, short, simple example, but it also shows your emotional recognition of your colleague's behavior and personality. So where you say here, he's quite proud and didn't openly ask for help. In your interview, if you're asked a question like this about helping a friend or colleague, it's normally because there is some form of teamwork or perhaps working together in the role. So demonstrating emotional intelligence in order to help your friend is a huge benefit. You're already showing parts of the outcome here where you say he was really grateful because it started to show the difference your actions are already making. You're demonstrating your thoughtfulness here where you mention you brought along snacks and drinks to diffuse the stress your colleague was feeling. Add these little details in your answer. Things like sending a thoughtful message or running an errand for a friend are good ideas too, as these are the types of things that the interviewer is listening out for with this type of question. Then, of course, the outcome is clear here. He felt better, more confident, finished the presentation, and finished it early. It's hugely helpful in your interview if you can include multiple positive outcomes. And of course, you can see again there, I used the STAR method for this answer. Question 3 is tell me about a time when you failed. The example answer is, as a new secretary a few years ago, I was working in a busy law firm and I was responsible for scheduling appointments, managing phone calls, and maintaining the office filing system. One day I received a call from a client who needed to schedule a last-minute meeting with their attorney. Despite a full schedule, I agreed to squeeze in the appointment as I wanted to accommodate the client, but failed to double-check with the attorney first. As a result, they were unprepared for the meeting and they were not able to provide the level of service the client expected. I really felt like I'd failed in this aspect of my new role. I felt embarrassed and disappointed, but I knew I needed to take ownership of my failure to communicate. I spoke with the attorney to apologize and to establish a clearer system for communicating last-minute appointments. Once he agreed, I contacted the client to apologize for the mistake, I explained that I was new and still learning and offered to reschedule the appointment with the attorney with no extra charge. The client was understanding and agreed to a second appointment, which went ahead as standard. Going forward, I was much more proactive in communicating schedules and priorities. I also took steps to improve my organizational skills and ensure that I could manage the office's workload effectively. So why is this a good answer and how can I use it? So there are a lot of strong areas here in that answer you can use. Of course, it's a longer answer, so just use the parts that you find most relevant and useful. The strongest parts are the area at the beginning where you explain that you were new. This adds context when discussing failure. So if you're new in a role, you're more likely to make mistakes, and these could be a wide range. So it could be that you were given a very high workload, or instructions weren't clear, or maybe you didn't double check them, which led to a failure. So make sure that you're clear in your interview. So like I said earlier in the mistake example for question 1, also don't try to make too much of a hero story. A strong part of this answer is the fact that you're being clear that the failure happened to completion. So there was no way to salvage it. The failure happened, whereas in the earlier mistake example, you were able to fix it before there was a fully negative outcome. Failure adds authenticity to your character in an interview. So don't ever say that you haven't failed before. I've heard this answer more than once. Avoid this. Interviewers don't like it because it's simply not true. A failure question is an opportunity to show vulnerability and therefore build a connection with your interviewer, even if the failure wasn't at work. So here in the action part of the answer, it also has all the ways that you actively address the failure, including your attitude towards it. I knew I needed to take an ownership of my failure. I apologized to the attorney. I apologized to the client. All of these areas are important in your answer to show how you handle failure as opposed to avoiding the failure. This is you demonstrating that you have the maturity to own up to your mistakes. And this is important because not everyone does. We all know people who can never admit failure and for whom everything is someone else's fault. So answering like this shows maturity and self-awareness, and I highly recommend that you demonstrate that in your answer. Question 4 is tell me about a time you showed leadership. This is a competency-based interview question as well as a situational question. So competency-based questions are assessing your ability to do something in a particular area of the role. And so both situational and behavioral questions can both be classed as competency-based questions. I cover the top 15 competency-based interview questions and answers in this video, which I will link in the description below, along with the other videos so that you're fully prepped for your interview. An example answer is, I was asked to be part of a project that was working on integrating a new IT system. It was a complex and technically challenging project, and it was critical that we delivered it on time. I was the most experienced person in the project team of 6, but we had no assigned leader, and things quickly felt unstructured and chaotic. I wanted to ensure the project's success, so I asked if the team would mind if I made some suggestions based on previous projects that I had managed. The team agreed, so I first suggested that we assign clear roles based on our individual specialist skills. I then recommended that we set up a weekly meeting and asked if anyone would be willing to arrange this and book this in. I wrote down outlines for brainstorming sessions and incorporated the team's ideas. I also flagged the risks we needed to consider in the project based on the timeline. With these clearer guidelines and a more structured approach, we worked together cohesively. 3 of the project team members fed back to me that they felt more relieved after I had taken charge, as they could see a clearer path to the project delivery goals. So why is this a good answer and how can I use it? So I specifically chose an example here that is from the perspective of somebody who isn't currently already leading a team. Showing leadership is a lot more challenging in a role that doesn't already include leadership or management duties. Leadership and management are not the same thing, but there are a lot of similarities, hence the example. And although in this example, it was a taking charge example, showing leadership can include things like celebrating team accomplishments and showing recognition, outwardly supporting something in order to encourage cohesion, even if you personally aren't that enthusiastic about it, demonstrating a balanced and level-headed approach in difficult times. It can even be learning to ask questions. When someone in leadership or management asks you to do something, it might be asking them for more information or challenging them in an appropriate way. So the strongest parts of this answer are first here, where it says, I asked the team. This is super important because I've already included here that the team had no assigned leader. So why is this important in your answer? Mainly because not everybody responds well to somebody just taking control of a situation, assuming a leadership role, or instructing them to do tasks if they're not already the designated manager or leader in some form. So what you'd be showing here is diplomacy, a way to lead without being domineering or oppressive. You're presenting it as a logical suggestion because you've managed projects before and you're the most experienced. It's unlikely that people will say no when you frame it in this way as a suggestion. So the next key part is here, where you've asked someone if they would be willing to book in team meetings. So this is important because when you're taking a leadership approach, sometimes it's about recognizing that you are best placed leading and not doing. And that is challenging for a lot of people that are learning leadership skills or transitioning into a leadership role. They sometimes default to the doing activities. So to ask people to volunteer to do something that you could physically do yourself takes confidence, but it also demonstrates an understanding of delegation, which is a leadership skill. So in this example, you're taking the stance of someone who is leading and overseeing as well as contributing. So in some cases, you're delegating work, like here in the meeting booking request, and in other instances, you're doing the work yourself, like here when you're writing down brainstorm outlines. And the last part is where you talk about team members verbally telling you that they felt relieved. So this is very important in your answer. I'm a big fan of being ultra clear, never assuming that your interviewer knows what you mean. Just lay out verbally in your answer what the impact was on the team, as it shows that you recognized that which is important in a leadership role. You need to be aware of your actions and the impact on your team. The next question is, describe a time when you worked in a team. So you can also think of this question as describe a time when you worked as a team, because this question is exploring your contribution as well as how you specifically work in a team. I've heard answers to this which are descriptions of what someone does day to day as part of a team, as opposed to a specific example of a time. So an example answer is, in my previous job as an office manager, I worked as part of a team responsible for organizing a company-wide charity event. There were a wide variety of tasks to be done, so I recommended that we categorize them and then manage separate areas to make things more cohesive, such as volunteer management, which would include recruiting volunteers and scheduling shifts, or marketing, which involved social media updates, distributing flyers and newsletters. I volunteered to manage the planning and logistics, which included creating a budget, organizing transportation, and communicating with vendors and suppliers. I also worked closely with the charity to understand their needs and ensure that the event was aligned with their mission. I suggested we set up a WhatsApp group so we could keep up to date on any urgent updates, as well as weekly scheduled meetings. Through regular communication and working together to keep each other updated, the charity event was a huge success. We raised more than £10,000 for charity. I was incredibly pleased with how we worked as a team, and I really enjoyed the experience. Our team's effort was recognized in the company's quarterly update meeting, in which we were individually mentioned by the CEO. So why is this a good answer and how can I use it? The clearest parts of this answer to take note of are where it includes your own contributions in the event planning. So sometimes when you're asked to recount or remember something in an interview, it's easy to just talk about what happened and lose the opportunity to sell yourself and your individual contributions. In this example, there are multiple contributions, and this is what boosts your answer dramatically. So you've got here, I recommended we categorize the activities. That demonstrates your focus on staying organized, which is critical in a team and important to demonstrate in your interview. Everyone has their own ideas and perspectives, so recognizing the need for structure is important. And then you've got here, I suggested we set up a WhatsApp group, and I volunteered to manage planning and logistics, and specifically what that entails. So the interviewer is clear on your efforts. Another important thing to include is at least 1 or 2 mentions of what your team did, so you can show your interviewer that you're recognizing their contributions as well, because it is a teamwork question. So one thing that I included here, which I highly recommend, is including personality and preferences. So I added here, I enjoyed the experience. I was incredibly pleased with how we worked together. This is important in your answer because if you've been asked about this, it's normally because there's teamwork in the role. They're unlikely to ask if it's an isolated role. So adding in how you feel about working in a team and the emotional effect on you is incredibly powerful here. It shows your personality fits the role. Of course, talk about how it genuinely affected you. You don't need to use these exact words in that answer. Question 6 is tell me about a time you had a conflict at work. So an example answer is about 6 months ago, I was working as part of a cross-functional team on a complex project with tight deadlines. Each team member had their own specific roles and responsibilities. My task was to coordinate the project's timeline and ensure that everyone met their deadlines. However, during the project, a colleague and I disagreed on the allocation of staff, resources, and the priority of certain tasks. They wanted more resources focused on their area of the project, whereas I felt that resources should be more evenly distributed. I asked my colleague for a separate conversation specifically on this topic, as I felt in order for the project to move forward smoothly, we needed to iron this out. They listed reasons that they felt that reallocating staff and resources to their area are critical for the project's success. I decided to be very transparent about the constraints we faced, including budget limitations and competing demands from other departments that my colleague was not previously aware of. With this new understanding of the bigger picture, my colleague agreed to a compromise. We reallocated some resources, less than he originally asked for, but enough to address key concerns. And we also agreed to adjust timelines for some of the tasks. I regularly cover tough interview questions and answers. So if you're job hunting, then let me know in the comments what specific areas or questions you need help with. I'm pretty active in answering questions. So why is this a good answer and how can I use it? So this question is about conflict. I do have a video dedicated to interview questions about resolving conflict, which is this one here. So I'll link that in the description below. Now, what you're demonstrating with this answer is tact and judgment. So here, where you say that you asked for a separate conversation, indicates that you were aware of how disagreements can escalate. So asking for a separate discussion gives time for a breather after the initial agreement. Plus, it moves the conversation into a more private and focused setting. You can demonstrate this in your interview by sharing situations where you had to use tact, such as a situation where you need to decline a colleague's suggestion without dismissing their input or ideas, navigating office politics diplomatically by remaining neutral and professional, handling a situation where a coworker regularly interrupts others, for example, by politely redirecting the conversation to make sure everyone has a chance to speak. So there are 2 more key areas you can use here. One is here where you mentioned transparency about constraints. Sometimes this is required to resolve a conflict. Once someone has a deeper understanding and more context, it can shift their perspective. So by including something like this in your answer, you're demonstrating your judgment to share information that the colleague may not have been privy to previously. So the second area is the compromise at the end. This is a very balanced resolution to the conflict. So agreeing to a resolution that includes something that you didn't initially agree with shows maturity, and it shows that you understand that in order to resolve conflict, sometimes it's better to compromise. Question 7 is tell me about a time you made a difficult decision. An example answer is in my previous role as a project manager, I was assigned to lead a critical project. The project involved developing a new software solution for our client who had high expectations for quality and functionality. During the development phase, our team encountered a significant technical challenge. The new software had compatibility issues with the client's current systems. We had to halt the project, which started to cause workflow issues for our client. I gathered the development team for an urgent meeting just to discuss the problem and potential solutions. We discussed options from investing additional resources to outsourcing part of the development work. I finally decided to reallocate staff from working on other non-critical tasks to work on this project instead, so we could fix the technical issue faster. This was a difficult decision because I knew it would require a temporary shift in priorities and put additional pressure on the team to deliver. But I saw this as a calculated risk to meet the client's expectations. With additional staff on the project, we were able to work much faster to resolve the technical issue, and although we had to extend the project deadline, the client was impressed with our quick problem solving and the quality of the final software solution we delivered. I was particularly impressed with the intense coordination and effort from the team. Why is this a good answer and how can I use it? So I designed this answer around a complex issue that would require a difficult decision. So I highly recommend that you take the time to think about a few scenarios before your interview, as coming up with these on the spot can be tricky. So just be very clear about why the decision was difficult. So it could be something like deciding between competing projects and tasks when they're both critical, making the decision to terminate an employee, balancing work-life demands and setting boundaries, handling a very difficult but important client or customer, and managing their expectations. So let's just look at the key areas of the action and result section of this answer. So first is your approach, leading up to the difficult decision. Instead of considering everything yourself and basing your decision on that, you pulled in a team and went into detail about the impact and options. So that's here where it says, I gathered the team for an urgent meeting and we discussed various options, from additional resources to outsourcing work. So in your own interview, if you don't have a team, you can give examples of consulting colleagues and taking their opinions into account before making your decision. But also make it clear that the ultimate decision was yours and why it was difficult. That's the other strength in this answer, is the clarity. So here I finally decided to reallocate staff, and here this was a difficult decision because a clear explanation of why. So this answer is also strong because it includes the complexity and the impact of the decision, going into the decision details, and then at the end here where it has, I was particularly impressed with the coordination and the effort of the team. In your answer, if your decision involves others like a team, then include recognition and appreciation of their efforts, because it shows empathy and the mark of good leadership if that's relevant in your example. Question 8 is, how do you handle pressure? Now, you don't need to use the STAR method in this answer. The question isn't asking about a time when you did something. It's a behavioral question assessing your ability to manage in a pressurized role or environment, but you can still treat this as a situational question and include an example of a time when you handle pressure to show how you handle pressure. So here I'm going to share two answers, one that doesn't use the STAR method but is still impactful, and one that does, so you can see the difference. The first answer is, I think pressure is a normal part of the working day. I'm used to working in situations where I suddenly have a high workload or priorities change at short notice. In these instances, I like to give myself a moment to assess the situation. Although pressure can sometimes mean that you need to act quickly, I don't see pressurized situations as an indication that I need to panic or act without thinking. So if an immediate decision isn't required and it's simply the usual pressure of a deadline being moved forward or a sudden influx of work, I'll assess the options first. Sometimes the outcome can include things like reprioritizing my workload, maybe creating a new workflow around critical tasks only, considering whether it might be more logical to ask for temporary support from other team members, and whether deadlines may need to be moved as a result, and then who I would need to notify in that instance. So that answer is a clear explanation of how you manage pressure without the STAR method. The answer is split into three parts. The first is here, where you explain that you're used to working in pressurized situations with a couple of quick examples, high workload, short notice. The second is your reassurance that you assess before acting, showing that you can stay calm under pressure. Then in the third part of the answer, there are lots of quick, short examples of actual actions that you might take to handle pressure depending on the situation. Reprioritizing, creating a new workflow, asking for support, moving deadlines, notifying affected staff members. Now, here's an answer that includes the STAR method to how do you handle pressure. I believe that during pressurized moments, it's important to stay focused on the overall goal and to be decisive whilst not allowing the work quality to drop. In fact, I have an example. So in my previous role, I was working on a project for a client and they moved the deadline forward because of challenges outside of their control. I was already working on another project and this change gave both projects the same deadline. This was an immense amount of pressure, and I realized that my team and I had a very limited time to meet this demand while also making sure our daily business was not affected by this sudden workload. In order to make sure the quality of work for the client was not affected, I implemented a new workflow for my team based around critical tasks only. I assigned different tasks to different team members and made sure to check in with them every day. In addition, I took some of the work on myself to make sure that everything would be done on time. I managed to finish both projects on time, and our clients were very satisfied with the work. One of them even signed a huge contract for future projects. Question 9 is, tell me about a time you missed a deadline. An example answer is, during my time as a marketing coordinator, I was responsible for organizing a major product launch event for a new line of consumer electronics. The event was scheduled to take place at a prestigious venue and was expected to attract industry professionals, media representatives, and potential customers. I was responsible for coordination, venue selection, audiovisual setup, and promotional materials. I was contacted by the venue a week before the event, and they advised me that the building infrastructure for the venue required extensive repairs due to extreme weather, and therefore the venue wouldn't be available on the scheduled date. I immediately started to call around and found that there were no other venues that could accommodate our event size at such short notice. I asked for an emergency meeting with some team members and management. We collectively decided to postpone the event by a week to allow time to secure an alternative venue and make adjustments to the event logistics. Despite our best efforts, we missed the original event deadline due to the venue issue. However, by communicating the situation to stakeholders, attendees, sponsors, and media partners, I was able to manage their expectations and hold on to their interest and support. With the additional week, I was able to secure a new venue. The event, though delayed, garnered positive feedback and media coverage, which led to significant product interest and additional sales growth. I gained a deeper understanding of the importance of contingency planning and building relationships with reliable alternative suppliers. Since then, I've strengthened my vendor selection and management process, making sure that backup options are in place for critical deliverables to minimize the chances of missing deadlines in future. So why is this a good answer and how can I use it? So you might have spotted in that answer that I added a learning on the end of the STAR method. So I mentioned this earlier. That comes after the situation, task, action, result. You've then got the learning. So brilliant for when you're talking about mistakes and errors. It's helpful to include what you learned or what you might do differently next time. Candidates that automatically include introspection and an interest in what they can improve are very attractive in an interview. A key part of the learning section here at the end is the impressive future steps learned about building relationships with multiple suppliers. So you would be demonstrating that you're minimizing risk to the business and not putting all your eggs in one basket. Question 10, describe a time when you were very busy. An example answer is, as a training and development specialist, I run a variety of internal training programs for staff across multiple areas. My day-to-day duties can include delivering training sessions, budgeting for the following quarter, coaching and mentoring, and collaborating with stakeholders at various levels. I also create multiple reports for various levels of leadership. A time when I became extremely busy is when I was asked to design and deliver a training program that would equip the sales team with the knowledge and skills that they needed to promote and sell new products. I needed to deliver this on top of my normal tasks. To handle the increased workload, I delegated some of my normal tasks to a junior training specialist and asked another team if they would mind running my usual reports. I then created a detailed project with clear timelines so I could set expectations for the sales team and management. I arranged time with the product development team to understand more about the new products. Finally, I set a training schedule for the sales team so they could learn in bite-sized pieces and retain the information. I did end up working late at times to complete all of the training materials, as the additional workload made me incredibly busy. Ultimately, the sales team was prepared and confident in their knowledge of the new product line. They felt able to effectively communicate the value of products to customers. I would describe this as one of the busiest times in my career. So why is this a good answer and how can I use it? This answer is very detailed, and there is a reason I designed it this way. This interview question is not a pointed question, so it's not asking about conflict, failure, communication, collaboration, or any specific scenario. Tell me about a time when you were very busy is quite general because most people would describe themselves as busy at work generally. So this answer can be a bit tricky because you need to make it clear why this busy scenario is out of the norm. The easiest way is to simply include a single sentence in your answer that explains this is why this situation was incredibly busy, such as here in the results section, the additional workload made me incredibly busy. So do include that in your interview. So the other way is to describe the busiest parts of what you normally do and then layer on top a specific project, task, or responsibility you were given that made things abnormally busy in order for the interviewer to get the full impact of how busy it was. It's important to list those busy responsibilities like in this answer. The next question is, tell me about a time you handled a difficult situation. An example answer is, during my previous job as an office administrator, I was tasked with creating a promotional campaign for a new product launch. One of the promotional materials I created was an email to our customer base, which included a discount code for a new product. Unfortunately, I accidentally sent the email to the wrong section of our database, which included customers who had already purchased the product at full price. As a result, some customers were understandably annoyed that they didn't receive the discount and reached out to our customer support team to complain. Once I realized my mistake, I immediately notified my supervisor and our customer support team. After getting approval, I sent out an apology email to the affected customers, acknowledging the mistake and offering them a personalized discount code as a gesture of goodwill. I also made sure to follow up with each customer to ensure that their issue had been resolved and complaints died down significantly as a result. So why is this a good answer and how can I use it? So if you're still here at question 11, you are exceptionally dedicated and it will pay off. And if you haven't yet, do leave a comment with your thoughts. If you find this helpful, let me know and do click like as well. So that difficult situation was based around a mistake. However, difficult can be interpreted in many ways. So typical work-based situations that might be considered difficult could range from things like dealing with a micromanaging boss and finding a diplomatic way to resolve it, high pressure deadlines, navigating office politics, managing a team member that is underperforming, adapting to complicated systems or new software to complete a piece of work, handling negative feedback, even giving a presentation. It might be something that is suddenly required at work. But if you have a fear of public speaking, that could make the task incredibly difficult. Question 12 is, tell me about a time you went above and beyond. So an example answer is, as a technical support representative, my role is to pick up technical queries and complaints from customers. A customer called in one day as he was struggling with a device and needed help, but he was also facing a significant language barrier. We were struggling to communicate effectively due to his limited English proficiency. I took several steps to ensure that we could communicate. So I spoke slowly and used simple, clear language, but the customer still had some difficulty. I attempted to check if any of my colleagues spoke Spanish, which was his primary language. Unfortunately, they didn't, but they suggested that I ask him to send an email instead. I didn't want to do this as the email may be misinterpreted. Plus, he would have to explain his query from the beginning. Instead, I suggested we switch to online chat where I could use a translator. Although the query took slightly longer to resolve, switching to chat ultimately solved the issue and the conversation was much more fluid. I was able to identify that the customer had multiple technical issues caused by incompatible software. I was able to remotely update his device and the issue was solved. So why is this a good answer and how can I use it? In this answer, the strongest area is where you take the interviewer on the journey of the steps that you took to go above and beyond. So in this answer, the support rep used clear language, spoke slowly, checked with his colleagues, and switched to online chat. They could have asked the customer to send an email, but didn't. So it doesn't need to be an overly complex answer. It just needs to show that you went outside of the norm to help the customer. Question 13 is, give me an example of a time when you motivated others. An example answer is, a few years ago, my company held a charity event to raise money for cancer research. I was put in charge of motivating my colleagues to take part in the event because In the past, staff interest levels had dropped in the run-up to company events such as these. To do this, I sent out weekly emails highlighting the importance of the cause and sharing personal stories about how the illness had affected the lives of people I knew. I also organized a team building event where we all went out to volunteer at a local cancer center. As a result, my colleagues were inspired to get involved and we were able to raise over £10,000 for cancer research. The experience was gratifying and showed me the power of motivation in achieving results for an important cause. I thought I'd share this example because I noticed on the job description that I would be involved in company events. So why is this a good answer and how can I use it? So the most notable area of this answer is at the end, the very last sentence where it states, because I noticed on the job description. So this is key because it shows that you prepared for your interview and cleverly constructed your answers to be as relevant as possible to the role you'll potentially be doing to show the interviewer your most relevant skills. The next question is, tell me about a time when you disagreed with your boss. An example answer is, in my previous role as a campaign manager, I was tasked with creating a social media campaign for promoting an event. My boss provided me with specific instructions on the type of content to create and the tone to use. While working on the campaign, I realized that the approach my boss suggested might not resonate well with our target audience. I felt that we needed to be more creative and edgy to stand out in a crowded market. I decided to do some research and analyze social media campaigns of similar products from other companies to get inspiration. I also shared my concerns and ideas to my boss, along with data and insights that I gathered from my previous research. We had a constructive discussion and I provided alternative strategies that aligned with the data I gathered. My boss was initially hesitant to take a risk with the new approach, but ultimately agreed with my strategy. And after seeing the data and insights I provided, the campaign ended up being successful, exceeding our expectations in terms of engagement and sales. So why is this a good answer and how can I use it? So the key with this answer is everything you did before you approached your boss. You did research, analyzed data and other social media campaigns. So when you're approaching your boss, you're well researched and it will come across more as the opinions of the market and consumers as opposed to your personal preference or disagreement. It's difficult to argue with data, solid figures and examples. So in your interview, represent this kind of balanced approach to disagreement with your manager or a senior member of staff. The next question is, describe a time when you helped someone. The example answer is, last summer, my friend was going through a tough time. She recently lost her job and was struggling to make ends meet. I knew she was feeling really down and I wanted to help in any way I could. I decided to offer to help her with her job search. I knew that updating her resume and cover letter would be a good place to start. So I offered to help her with that. I also suggested that we practice some interview questions together so she would feel more confident going into interviews. Over the course of a few weeks, I worked closely with her to update her resume and cover letter. We also did some mock interviews so she could get a feel for what to expect. I tried to be really encouraging and supportive throughout the process and make sure to offer constructive feedback where needed. I'm happy to say that Sarah landed a new job a few weeks later. She mentioned that my help was definitely a factor in her success, and I'm glad I could be there for her when she needed it most. Overall, I think this experience showed me the importance of being there for friends when they're going through a tough time. It also showed me how much of a difference a small gesture can make and how rewarding it can be to help someone else achieve their goals. Now let me know what you need help with in the comments. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you in the next video.